So, in many ways, the causes of World War One go back to 1848, and they're things we've been talking about for the past few weeks. They include nationalism, imperialism, and confusing alliances. So, by nationalism, we've talked about how there's this move to create countries that are based around an imagined identity, i.e., an identity that is based around a common culture. Well, after 1848, nationalism is also going to start to revolve around militarism. Will you die for your country, as I put it? But it's also going to be based around, well, how can you protect your culture and how can you protect your country? And militarism will play a part in that. So you'll want to get resources for your country. You'll also want to make sure that you can protect it against any perceived threat. Another long-term cause of World War I is imperialism. With the scramble for Africa, we looked at how European countries went to Africa and started carving it up. Well, in doing so, they start to come into conflict with each other. And they start to try and expand their territories in Africa over each other. So their militaries are building up more and more and more. Another long-term cause is confusing alliances. Europe is full of alliances during this era in which you're never fully sure who is working with whom. On the whole, we can be pretty sure that Germany is going to be allied with Austria sometimes. If you think back to the readings from 1848, the week we covered 1848, and the creation of the German state, Prussia doesn't always want to work with Austria. So sometimes the German states will work with Austria, and after Germany becomes a country, more often than not it will work with Austria, but sometimes it won't. France will sometimes ally itself with Germany. It'll sometimes ally itself against Germany and work with Russia. Sometimes it'll ally itself with Great Britain. Sometimes it won't. There's all of these confusing alliances that change every few years, and that makes things very complicated. Moreover, the terms of the alliances are even more complicated. With rising militaristic nationalism, part of these alliances are going to start having clauses that say, well, if we're attacked, you need to come protect us. And the terms of the alliances may be a little broad in what does it mean to protect you? Does it mean, okay, we are going to all out war? Or does it mean, okay, well, we'll send out some supplies that'll be necessary? It's not fully clear. So those are the long-term causes of the war. The short-term causes of the war are a new shift in power in Europe. So far this semester, we've seen a lot of shifts in power in Europe. So we've seen Europeans change the definition of power so that it revolves around trade from the colonies. And that means that the Dutch become the number one power. But then that shifts. We go into an era where technology is the main form of power. Well, Britain leads with that. But by the turn of the 20th century, we're starting to see a question of power that's based on the might of your military. Well, at this point, Britain's leading because of the might of its navy. And Germany wants to catch up. Germany really thinks that it's a new country, it feels left behind, and it feels like it really needs to prove to the world that it is a military superpower. Well, you can have armies all you want, but in this day and age, your might is registered by your navy. So Germany decides that it is going to try and build up a navy to rival that of the British. But there's a little issue. Germany isn't really a seafaring nation. It isn't a seafaring nation. There are a couple German ports, but it doesn't have the naval tradition that Britain has. So it has to work very, very difficult, very, very hard to catch up. But it slowly does, and starts to rival Britain as the number one naval nation in the world. Yay, awesome. Well, this means that Britain and Germany are going to see themselves as major rivals. And this is a major shift in power. For most of the course, when we've talked about military rivals, we've really talked about France and Britain, who were always duking it out. Well, France, by the turn of the 20th century, has its own stuff going on. It's competing, but it isn't the world power that it had been at the time of Napoleon. So we have a new shift in power that is Britain pitted against Germany for military dominance. And they're doing this by trying to build up their navies as fast and as much as they can. So that becomes a major player in the war and a major reason for the war. Germany starts to present itself as trying to be the new military might in Europe, not just against Britain, but in general in Europe. And when it starts eyeing imperial expansion, it's really trying to say, well, we're better than the British. So in the immediate causes of the war, we can have the assassination of Francis Duke Ferdinand. We can have all of these confusing alliances. But when it boils down to it, Germany was competing against Great Britain. They were trying to prove to each other that they were the head hotshots in Europe, that they were the main naval powers in Europe. And all of this leads to a level of chicken that goes on for about 20 years before the outbreak of war. Now, the immediate cause of war isn't really the assassination of Francis Duke Ferdinand. It isn't really Austria looking to Serbia and saying, okay, well, guess what? We are now going to penalize you for Serbian nationalists assassinating one of our royalty. The immediate cause is literally Germany invading Belgium. Germany does this because Belgium is allied with Great Britain. And Germany knows that the game of chicken this is the way to end the game of chicken, in which if it doesn't do this, it's just going to be a waiting game in which Germany militarizes, Britain and its allies militarize, and there's just kind of this Cold War going on. But Germany knows by invading Belgium, they have to provoke a response from Britain. And that's what they want to do. They want to expand militarily. They want to do that. But they also want to prove to the British that they are the new power in Europe. Now, initially, the goal of World War I, after fighting breaks out in summer and fall of 1914, is to have a short European war. Everyone thinks that the war will be over in a few months, that by 1915 it's done and dusted, who cares? They think it's just going to be another one of multiple tiny little wars. They think that Germany will probably invade Belgium, Britain will respond, there'll be some sort of treaty, everything will go home. Moreover, they want it to be very decisive. They want there to be a clear outcome from this treaty. What the British want is for the Germans to admit they were wrong and for there to be this decisive battle between the British allies and the German allies, for the Germans to be defeated and to go home with their tail between their legs. The Germans want the same thing from the British. And so both of them imagine this very short war, that it revolves around one decisive battle. But as we're going to see, that is not the case at all.